Well, I think this is very fitting to give the discussion on the safety of heparin after Dr. Goldhaber's elegant talk about frequently asked questions regarding anticoagulation. 3 years ago, you all have read in the newspapers about the heparin crisis, contaminant in heparin because of the Chinese adulteration of the heparin, which was marketed in the United States. NATF was the first organization to take the position and explored what was the contaminant and so forth. In our website, you will see our position. Even prior to that, every April, Dr. Goldhaber had a meeting on safety of anticoagulant drugs. So safety of these drugs is our prime concern. I'm going to give you an update of what is happening with unfractionated heparin. As you know, heparin is the drug without which we cannot live. Open heart surgery, all the interventional procedures are carried out, and surgical anticoagulation is carried out with unfractionated heparin. And the low molecular weight heparins are derived from unfractionated heparin. So, it's one of the most widely used anticoagulant for surgical, interventional, and procedural anticoagulation. Only IV anticoagulant with antidote. The other anticoagulants, such as the otomaxiban and Angiomax, which we were talked about this morning, do not have any antidote, and it is polytherapeutic. With wide clinical application, is cheap, cost-effective, and precursor of low molecular weight heparins. Heparin is also used as an anticoagulant for blood collection prior to certain laboratory tests. Now, the clinical use of heparin include therapeutic anticoagulation, surgical anticoagulation, prophylactic anticoagulation. Before the emergence of low molecular weight heparin, we used 7,500 units heparin twice a day and 5,000 3 times a day for prophylaxis. And we have the use of heparin in unstable angina and related coronary syndrome, and adjunct therapy with thrombolytic drugs and thrombotic and ischemic stroke, and the heparin-coated surfaces such as the dialysis membrane and other extracorporeal circulation devices. Now, this particular book is quite interesting and fictional. It's written by a cardiovascular surgeon, and it describes all the different things about the discovery of heparin and its multiple actions. It's about a 30 years old book, but it still is very interesting. So if you get your library to provide you this book, I would recommend you read it. The side effects of heparin, which are of concern, include, of course, hemorrhagic complications, heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, which is heparin-induced thrombosis, generation of anti-heparin platelet factor 4 antibodies, and antibody-activated platelets and endothelial cells. In addition to this, long-term effects of heparin may cause osteoporotic manifestation, and we have had pregnant women who were given heparin for prophylaxis of DVT in pregnancy, and they really developed very severe osteoporosis over the terms they were treated. Alopecia, which is of course not as common, but it is loss of hair and allergic reaction to heparin. The bleeding complication could be due to dosage error, which are very easy because heparin is provided in different strength, and one can easily make a mistake, and that has been done. Co-medications, anticoagulants together given with heparin may cause bleeding. Hemostatic abnormalities, patients with predispositions to bleeding, and improper neutralization, not using enough protamine sulfate, monitoring issues, heparin rebound, which is after the neutralization of heparin by protamine. Protamine clears faster than heparin. You have still remaining heparin, which could cause bleeding. And then drug interactions with heparin. The heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, of course, is one of the most catastrophic problems with heparin, and it results in many fatalities. It's an immune-mediated response to heparin, results in thrombocytopenia, that is, lowering of the platelets, may lead to amputation or death, and thrombosis can occur anywhere due to the venous or arterial thrombotic complications. So the consequences of HIT, the 50% of the patients exposed to heparin develop heparin-induced thrombocytopenia antibodies. 1 to 4% subsequently develop symptomatic HIT. Of these patients, about 30 to 40% develop thrombosis, and of these patients with HIT and thrombosis, there is a 30% mortality and a 20% limb amputation rate. Frequency of HIT due to low molecular weight heparins is much less, and with pentasaccharide is almost non-existent. So the treatment of suspected HIT patients, of course, we just have to discontinue all heparin immediately. And fortunately, we now have new parenteral anticoagulant such as Angiomax, Heparin, and Otomaximab. So heparin flushes, heparin-coated devices, dialysis units, low molecular weight heparin, they all are capable of generating antibodies. The diagnosis, treatment decisions, there are guidelines. Do not rely on laboratory test confirmation to initiate alternate anticoagulation for treatment in a suspect case of heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. It requires immediate attention. And for patients with a strongly or suspected confirmed HIT with or without thrombosis, use an alternate anticoagulant. Danaproid used to be available. It was given 1B classification by ACCP. Herodin, Liparurin is a brand. Decirurin is another branch. Argatroban and bivalirudin or Angiomax are parenteral oral thrombin agents which can be used for the management of HIT patients. Additional issues with heparin include dosing, monitoring issues where the instrument variability, point of care testing problems, and anti-10A monitoring for unfractionated heparin, and then in a specialized population, dosing of these patients as well as monitoring is a problematic issue, pediatric patient, elderly population, and drug interactions with heparin. So the improving treatment and reducing the risk of harm, so anticoagulation itself, as Dr. Goldhaber mentioned, is a high-risk treatment which commonly leads to adverse drug events because of complexity of dosing, monitoring, and patient compliance. So standardized practices can reduce the risk of adverse drug event, proper use of this drug. So what else has happened in the past few years with heparin? Of course, we have been using it for 75 years. Well, the lookalike ampules having 1,000 units, 10,000 units, and 20,000 units sometimes resulted in dosage errors. Now, that is easily taken care of by color-coding these ampules. Contaminated syringes with bacterial contaminant, such was the case with Serratia marcescens 2 years ago, where adverse reaction due to bacterial infections and other anaphylactic reactions were noted. And then we have generic heparins, sometimes which are overactive or underactive, so there was safety and efficacy issue. And then we had the contaminant crisis, which really led the FDA to really tighten up the regulations to quality assure heparin. So this is an old ampule of the heparin sodium and Haplock. There are two different units, 1,000 and 10,000, and you can easily make a mistake if it is not properly read. This was the bacterial, this is the Serratia marcescens, which was isolated from contaminated syringes, resulted in various severe reactions. But the most important problem occurred in 2008. From January 1, 2007 to May 31, 2008, over 246 deaths reported to the FDA associated with heparin, with 238 of these reported on or after January 1. 149 deaths, 146 reported on after January 1, fit the profile of allergic reactions, hypertension, and anaphylactic shock type of reactions. Almost 2/3 of the world's supply at that time was the porcine mucosa originating from China. Most of the remaining 1/3 was produced in North America, and the quality of raw material varied depending upon the origin. And until March 2008, there were no specific chemical guidelines. The NATF had a call of action where we asked if the current guidelines for assuring quality of heparin are proper. And of course, responding to that, the FDA addressed this issue. We published some work on what the contaminant was, and later on, certain steps were taken to assure the quality of heparin. The U.S. heparin supply, in 2007, Baxter Healthcare Corporation has 45% of the market share, including dialysis. American Pharmaceutical Partners, another 45%, and the generic and the Sanofi Aventis control the low molecular weight heparin. After the Baxter recall, and Baxter still does not sell heparin anymore, American Pharmaceutical Partners about 90%, Hospira 10%, and Sanofi still has the low molecular weight heparin along with the generics. So the heparin raw material is still 9 metric ton each year, 57% from China, 20% from European community, and then South America. South American heparin, there is a lot of bovine heparin there. Now, even in the case of porcine mucosal heparin, a different species of pig can result in different type of heparins. So there is a wide heterogeneity in heparin molecule. The recalled batches of heparin were found to contain a novel oversulfated chondroitin sulfate, which was man-made and adulterated at the time of manufacturing or post-manufacturing marketing of heparin. The contaminant was present in varying amounts. We worked on it and found up to 5 to 30% of the heparin was contaminated with this oversulfated contaminant. Some low molecular weight heparins were also found to contain the contaminant and were withdrawn all over the world. And this is a map which we made where we found out that the contaminant crisis was not only in the US but also in Canada, China, Australia, and many other countries which are shown as pink here. The FDA took very strong steps, embargoed all the importation until there were very strong chemical tests performed on heparin to make sure that the contaminant, which was known to be oversulfated contaminant, is not there, and then the release specification assured that the heparin is safe to be given to patients. So the main contaminant, oversulfated chondroitin sulfate, was isolated from several recalled heparin preparations, and then the oversulfated contaminant was prepared from porcine cartilage and compared with isolated heparin contaminants, and chemical and biological pharmacological assay were carried out, and this work was partly endorsed and supported by NATF. So how the product safety of heparin is now controlled. What are we doing now? First of all, the manufacturing process, and the FDA hired almost 3 times more staff to go and inspect the facilities where heparin or heparin-like drugs are manufactured. The US Pharmacopoeia had several meetings with Europeans and generated very strict specifications which are still in the works, and refinement is continued on. The FDA issued new guidelines on the composition of heparin, its importation, and very strict measures along with inspections, and embargo of products was then taking place at that time. Professional organization recommendations, including the North American Thrombosis Forum, the ISTH, also took position and provided some guidelines to revise certain specifications by different regulatory agencies all over the world. Other watchdog, National Safety Council, which of course discusses the safety of drugs and other products also issued certain warnings. So the safety issues related to unfractionated heparin from the standpoint of product origin and purity, microbial and viral contaminant assurance that they are not there, product adulteration with oversulfated contaminants or some other substances, they have been addressed. The corrective measures to resolve heparin issues, as I talked previously, for the look-alike ampules where we do not make any dosage error, are now addressed now. Very strict control, better labeling, different ampules for different dosing, contaminated syringes, they require microbial analysis, generic heparins, more stringent quality control, mandatory requirement, and contaminant heparin. I'd like to spend the next 2 or 3 minutes on the generic low molecular weight heparins. There are, as I discussed this morning, there are 3 different generic low molecular weight brands are introduced in this country now. The Winthrop, Amphstar, and the Sandoz. And NATF has taken a very strong position. There have been certain editorials, we have had meetings, and we have provided some guidance to both USP and the FDA and the government. We are still in contact. As a matter of fact, the contaminant story is not totally complete. Just 2 days ago, I have received a congressional inquiry regarding this matter, that the contaminants are not fully explored. But what I can tell you that the heparin quality today is safe, and we have taken measures to avoid any of the adulteration, and we will be using this drug for some years to come, because without heparin we cannot do dialysis, we cannot do the open heart surgery and interventional cardiology. And NATF is committed to assure the safety of not only heparin, low molecular weight heparin, but the exciting newer oral anticoagulant drugs. Thank you very much.